It started with a growl, so low and guttural it seemed to vibrate through the concrete floor of the shelter, a sound that promised violence and held no room for negotiation. It was a sound that made the other dogs fall silent, their hopeful yaps and whines instantly extinguished. In the last kennel, at the very end of the lonely, echoing corridor they called Death Row, sat the reason for the silence. He was a magnificent German shepherd, but his beauty was eclipsed by the raw fury that coiled in his powerful body. The sign on his cage was stark, written in thick, unforgiving black marker, Xander, K9 retiree. Aggressive. Do not approach. No one understood why he was like this. He was a decorated police dog, a hero who had sniffed out contraband, tracked fugitives, and saved lives. But something had snapped. The official report was vague, citing an incident on the job that left his handler injured, and Xander himself deemed unstable, unpredictable, and dangerous. Now he was here, a fallen king in a steel cage, his time rapidly running out. The shelter staff, though they were animal lovers, were also pragmatists. They saw a liability, a tragedy with no happy ending. His date was set. In 72 hours, Xander's story would be over. What was the secret he was hiding behind those intelligent, tormented amber eyes? What had turned a hero into a monster? Stay with us, because this incredible story of a broken dog and a pregnant woman who saw something no one else could will leave you absolutely speechless. The truth of what happened that day, and what was about to happen, would change everything. Before we dive into this unbelievable journey, please make sure to hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that will touch your soul. And I'm always so curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your country name in the comments below. I absolutely love seeing how far these stories of hope and courage travel. Clara felt the growl in her bones. She stood at the entrance to the corridor, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly. At 7 months pregnant, everything felt heightened. Her emotions, her senses, her awareness of the world's fragility. Her husband, David, had suggested getting a dog. "A protector for you and the baby," he'd said, imagining a fluffy, friendly golden retriever puppy. But Clara had felt a pull toward the county shelter, a place of second chances. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him. The shelter manager, a weary-looking man named Mark, shook his head. "I wouldn't go down there, ma'am. Especially not, you know." He gestured vaguely at her stomach. "The dogs in this wing are difficult cases. Xander, the one making all that noise, he's the worst of them. Former K9, we're putting him down on Friday." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Putting him down. The finality of it felt so cruel, so dismissive of the life that still burned so brightly, so fiercely in that cage. Curiosity, stronger than her fear, pulled her forward. David had been called into work, so she was alone, free to follow this strange, inexplicable instinct. She walked slowly down the corridor, the barking of other dogs a desperate chorus around her. But she only had eyes for the last kennel. As she drew closer, Xander launched himself against the chain-link door. The crash of his body against the metal was deafening. He snarled, his lips pulled back to reveal a formidable set of white teeth. His eyes, however, weren't just angry. Clara saw something else in their depths, a desperate, frantic intelligence, a plea. It wasn't mindless rage, it was a message she couldn't yet decipher. Everyone else saw a monster, but Clara, in that moment, saw a soul in agony. "Hello there," she whispered, her voice barely audible over his furious barking. She stopped a safe 10 feet from the cage. "My name is Clara." And then the most incredible thing happened. The dog, Xander, stopped barking. He didn't relax. His body was still a taut spring of muscle, ready to explode. But he stopped the noise. He lowered his head slightly, his ears swiveling to catch her soft voice. He watched her, his gaze intense, analytical. He looked from her face, down to her hand resting on her belly, and then back to her eyes. A low whine escaped his throat, a sound so full of sorrow it cracked Clara's heart wide open. Mark, who had followed her at a distance, was stunned into silence. In the weeks Xander had been there, he had never stopped his aggressive display for anyone. Not for the handlers with their catch poles, not for the vets with their sedatives, not for the kindest volunteers with their peace offerings of sausage and cheese. But for this pregnant woman, he fell silent. "What's his story?" Clara asked, never taking her eyes off the dog. "The real story." Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The file says he attacked his handler, Officer Miller, during a warehouse raid. Miller ended up with a shattered leg. The department psychologist evaluated Xander and declared him unstable. Too much prey drive, too aggressive, a danger to the public. Miller didn't even fight it, just signed him over." It sounded so simple, so clear-cut, but it didn't feel right. The dog, before her, now sitting on his haunches and watching her with an almost unbearable focus, didn't feel like a mindless attacker. He felt misunderstood. Deeply and profoundly misunderstood. She saw the faded scar above his right eye, the slight limp in his back leg when he shifted his weight. He was a warrior, a veteran, and he had been discarded. "I want to see him," Clara said, her voice firm. "Ma'am, I can't let you do that," Mark said, stepping forward. "It's against every regulation. He's bitten 2 staff members already. He's a ticking time bomb." As Mark moved closer, Xander was on his feet in an instant, the terrifying growl, returning, louder and more menacing than before. He wasn't looking at Clara. His entire focus was on the manager. He was positioning his body in the cage as if to shield her, even through the steel mesh. Clara saw it clearly. He wasn't just aggressive, he was protective. The aggression was directed. It was specific. She took a step back, and Mark stopped. Xander's growl subsided, though his eyes remained locked on the man. "He doesn't like you," Clara stated simply. Mark scoffed. "He doesn't like anyone, ma'am. That's the problem." But Clara knew he was wrong. She felt a connection to this broken animal, a strange and powerful certainty that she was meant to be here, standing in this cold, sad place. She thought of the life growing inside her, a new beginning, and looked at this magnificent creature whose life was about to be unjustly ended. "What if I just sat here for a while?" she asked. "Outside his cage, just talking to him." Mark hesitated. It was unorthodox and probably foolish, but the dog was quiet again, watching the woman. He had never seen Xander behave this way. Maybe, just maybe, it would keep the dog calm for the rest of the afternoon. "Fine," he relented. "But you stay at least 5 feet from the cage, and I mean it. You so much as touch that latch, and I'm calling security." He walked away, shaking his head at the foolishness of a pregnant woman trying to tame a monster. Clara pulled over a plastic stool, wincing slightly as she lowered herself onto it. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and animal fear. She looked at Xander. His amber eyes were fixed on her, his powerful chest rising and falling with each steady breath. "They've given up on you, haven't they, boy?" she murmured. "They think you're broken." Xander rested his head on his paws, his gaze unwavering. He seemed to be listening, to be absorbing every word, every nuance of her gentle tone. For the next hour, Clara just talked. She told him about her life, about her husband David, about her excitement and her fears of becoming a mother. She told him about the nursery she was painting, the tiny clothes she had folded, the name she had picked out. Leo. And Xander just watched. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't lunge. He simply lay there, a silent, attentive guardian in a cage, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a flicker of something other than rage and confusion. He felt seen. Clara came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time the ritual was the same. Xander would be a storm of fury, barking and snarling at any staff member who walked by. But the moment he saw Clara, the moment her soft voice drifted down the corridor, he would fall silent. He would lie down, his eyes locked on hers, a silent sentinel. The shelter staff watched in disbelief. They started calling her the dog whisperer. But Clara knew it wasn't magic. It was a connection, a trust that was being woven thread by fragile thread in the unlikeliest of places. She started to research his case. She spent hours online, digging through old news articles about the K9 unit. Xander, or Excalibur as he was known then, was a local hero. There were photos of him standing proudly next to his handler, Officer Miller, in front of a mountain of seized narcotics. There was a story about him finding a lost child in the woods during a thunderstorm. He wasn't a monster. He was a legend. So what happened in that warehouse? The official report was sealed, but she found a small local news blog that had an interview with an anonymous officer who was there that day. The officer described the scene as chaotic. They were raiding a suspected drug operation in a derelict textile mill. Excalibur was acting strange, the officer was quoted as saying. He kept pulling away from Miller, barking at a wall. Miller thought he was distracted, tried to pull him back on task. Next thing we know, the dog lunges, Miller goes down, and a section of the roof collapses, right where Miller had been standing a second before. Clara's blood ran cold. He wasn't attacking his handler. He was saving him. He had sensed the structural instability, the imminent danger, and his attack was a desperate, last-ditch effort to pull his partner out of harm's way. But in the chaos, with Miller injured and the bust going sideways, the story had been twisted. Xander's heroism had been misinterpreted as aggression. He had been punished for saving a life. Now, it all made sense. His rage at the shelter wasn't random. It was the frantic, frustrated cry of a hero who had been betrayed and misunderstood. He was trying to communicate, to warn, to protect. But the only language he had was one that humans interpreted as violence. He was trapped, not just in a kennel, but in a nightmare of miscommunication. She looked at the calendar on her phone. It was Thursday. Xander had less than 24 hours. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let them do it. She couldn't let them extinguish this brave, noble spirit because of their own blindness. She drove to the shelter, her mind made up. David would think she was crazy. The shelter would think she was crazy, but it didn't matter. She found Mark in his office, filling out paperwork. "I want to adopt him," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. Mark looked up from his desk, his expression a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Clara," he said, using her first name for the first time. "We've been over this. He's not a pet. He's a liability. My superiors would never sign off on it, especially not to a family with a baby on the way. The risk is astronomical." "The risk," Clara shot back, her voice gaining strength, "is in not listening. He's not aggressive, he's a protector. He's trying to talk, and no one is listening to him. He saved his handler's life. I read about the incident. The roof collapsed right where he would have been standing." Marks sighed, a deep, weary sound. "That's a theory, a rumor from a blog. The official report from a trained psychologist and his own handler says otherwise. My hands are tied. The order is signed. It's tomorrow morning at 9. Tears streamed down Clara's face. She felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled her knees. She had failed him. She had understood the truth too late. She walked back to the kennel wing for one last goodbye. Xander was already on his feet, whining softly as if he could sense her grief. She knelt down in front of his cage, ignoring the 5-foot rule, and pressed her palm flat against the cold chain link. "I'm so sorry, boy," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I tried." Xander pushed his nose through one of the diamond-shaped holes in the fence, nudging her hand. He licked away one of her tears that had fallen onto her knuckles. It was a gesture of such profound gentleness, such deep comfort that it shattered what was left of Clara's composure. He wasn't a monster. He was a guardian angel in a fur coat. And in that moment of shared grief, a crazy, desperate idea sparked in Clara's mind. It was a long shot, a wild gamble, but it was the only one she had left. She spent the rest of the day on the phone. She was a whirlwind of desperate energy, fueled by adrenaline and a fierce maternal need to protect. She called the police department, asking to speak to the K-9 unit supervisor. She was transferred, put on hold, and dismissed. She called local news stations, leaving frantic messages for investigative reporters. She called animal rights advocacy groups. Everyone gave her the same response, a sympathetic but firm refusal. The case was closed. The dog was deemed dangerous. As evening fell, David came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, her face pale and tear-streaked. He listened patiently as she poured out the whole story. Xander's silence with her, his targeted aggression, the blog post, her theory about the warehouse. "Honey," he said gently, taking her hands, "I love your heart. I love that you want to save him, but you're pregnant. You're emotional. You can't take on a dog like this. What if you're wrong? What if he really is unstable? Think about the baby. Think about Leo." "That's exactly who I'm thinking about," she cried. "I want our son to grow up in a world where we fight for the voiceless, where we don't just throw away heroes because we misunderstand them. David, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That dog is special. He saved his partner, and they punished him for it." Her passion, her absolute conviction, began to chip away at his skepticism. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he'd fallen in love with. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay. What's your crazy, desperate idea?" A glimmer of hope returned to Clara's eyes. "His handler, Officer Miller. If I can just talk to him, if he'll just tell the truth." It took David, with his calm, logical demeanor, less than an hour to find a home address for a recently retired officer named James Miller. He lived 50 miles away in a small town in the next county. It was a reckless, impulsive plan, but as Clara stood up, ready to drive into the night, David grabbed her keys. "No," he said, "you're not going alone. We're going together." The drive was tense and silent. What if Miller refused to see them? What if he confirmed the official story? What if this was all just a pregnant woman's fantasy, a story she'd invented to cope with the sadness of a doomed animal? They found the house, a modest single-story home with a tidy lawn. A man was sitting on the porch swing, a heavy cast on his right leg propped up on a stool. He had a grim, haunted look on his face. It had to be him. Clara approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Officer Miller," she called out softly. The man looked up, his eyes wary. "It's just James now. Who's asking?" "My name is Clara. This is my husband, David. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but it's about your partner. It's about Excalibur." A storm of emotions crossed Miller's face. Pain, guilt, anger. "He's not my partner anymore," he said gruffly. "That dog is dangerous. He ended my career." "No," Clara said, stepping onto the porch, her voice ringing with certainty. "He saved your life." She recounted her theory, the blog post, the way the anonymous officer described Xander barking at the wall just before the collapse. "He was warning you, wasn't he? He wasn't attacking you. He was pulling you away." Miller looked away, his jaw tight. He stared out at the dark street, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of the swing. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence was thick with unspoken truths. I was arrogant, he finally whispered, his voice thick with shame. He was the best partner I ever had. He never gave a false alert, not once in 6 years. That day, the intel was solid, the target was in sight. I was focused. Xander started acting up, pulling at the leash, barking at nothing. I thought he was spooked by the noise, distracted. I yelled at him. I tried to force him to heel. Tears welled in his eyes. He fought me. He turned and grabbed my pant leg, pulled with all his might. I lost my balance and went down, and my leg just snapped. And then the world came down. He pointed a trembling finger at the ceiling. Tons of concrete and steel. Right where I was standing, he saved me, and I let them blame him. "Why?" David asked, his voice gentle. "Why did you let them?" "Pride," Miller choked out. "Shame. If I admitted my dog was right and I was wrong, that I'd misread my own partner, I'd be a joke. The K9 handler who couldn't even understand his own dog. So I let the official story stand. I told myself it was for the best, that he was too unpredictable now. I abandoned him." The confession hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. "He's going to be put down tomorrow morning at 9, Clara said softly. Miller's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. "What? No. They told me he was going to a K9 retirement facility." "He was deemed too aggressive," Clara explained. "He's been at the county shelter for weeks. He's terrified and alone, and he's going to die because of a lie." Without another word, James Miller grabbed his crutches. "Get me in your car," he commanded, his face a mask of grim determination. "We're going to fix this. Now." They drove through the night, a strange trio united by a singular purpose, to save an innocent life. Miller made a call to his old precinct chief, his voice booming with an authority Clara hadn't heard before. He confessed everything, demanding that the euthanasia order be stayed. The chief, shocked by the revelation, promised to meet them at the shelter at dawn. They arrived at the shelter just as the first gray light of morning was breaking through the darkness. The air was cold and still. Mark was already there, his face grim. He was preparing for the task he hated most. "You can't do it," Clara said, rushing up to him as Miller and David followed. "Clara, the order stands," Mark began, but then he saw Officer Miller, in his uniform, standing on crutches. "The order is a mistake," Miller said, his voice echoing in the quiet parking lot. "Excalibur is a hero. I'm the one who made the mistake. I'm here to take my partner home." What followed was a flurry of phone calls, of faxes, of override commands from the highest levels of the police department and county administration. Clara stood by, her hand on her belly, watching as a terrible injustice was slowly, painstakingly undone. The sun was fully up when the final confirmation came through. The order was rescinded. Xander was safe. When they opened the kennel door, Xander didn't bound out. He walked out slowly, cautiously. He ignored Mark. He ignored the other staff who had gathered to watch the morning's drama unfold. He walked straight past his former handler, his supposed master, and went directly to Clara. He stopped in front of her, sat down, and gently rested his massive head on her pregnant belly. A soft, contented sigh escaped him. He had found his person. He had found his new purpose. In the middle of all the chaos, the shouting, and the official proceedings, he had chosen his family. He had chosen her. Miller watched, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "He was never my dog," he said quietly to David. "I was just his job. She's his heart." He officially signed over all ownership rights to Clara and David, his final act of redemption for the partner he had so gravely wronged. Bringing Xander home was both wonderful and terrifying. He was a perfect gentleman inside the house, instantly house-trained, quiet, and calm. He followed Clara from room to room, a silent, furry shadow. If she sat on the couch, he would lie on the floor with his head on her feet. If she went to take a nap, he would station himself outside her bedroom door. His protection was a constant, comforting presence. But his old instincts remained sharp. He was deeply wary of strangers. He would stand between Clara and the mailman, a low rumble in his chest, until the man was gone. He tolerated David, but it was clear Clara was his priority. David, to his credit, was patient, understanding that Xander's trust had to be earned, not demanded. The true test, the moment that would prove everything Clara had believed, came 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. David was at work and Clara was home alone, organizing baby clothes in the nursery. A friendly neighbor, a woman named Sharon from across the street, had recommended a handyman to help them assemble the crib and install some new shelves. His name was Mike. When the doorbell rang, Xander was instantly on alert. He let out a single, sharp bark and stood at the top of the stairs, his body rigid, staring down at the front door. "It's okay, boy," Clara called, waddling down the stairs. "It's just the handyman." She opened the door to a smiling, affable man in a tool belt. "Mike?" she asked. "That's me," he said, his smile wide. "Sharon sent me. Ready to build a crib?" But before Clara could even invite him in, Xander was there. He moved with a speed that was shocking in such a large dog. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply materialized between Clara and the open door, a solid wall of muscle and fur. He turned his body sideways, physically blocking the doorway. His head was low, and the fur along his spine was raised. He stared at the handyman with an unnerving, silent intensity. "Whoa, big fella," Mike said, his smile faltering. He took a half-step back. "Is he friendly?" "He's protective," Clara said, her hand instinctively going to Xander's back. She could feel the tension vibrating through him. "Xander, it's okay. Down." Xander didn't move. He didn't even blink. He let out a low, almost inaudible growl. It was the sound from the shelter, the sound that promised consequences. It was a warning. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The handyman seemed nice enough. He was recommended by her neighbor. She was being silly, letting an overprotective dog dictate her life. She reached for Xander's collar. "Come on, boy, let the man in." But as her fingers touched his collar, Xander did something he'd never done before. He turned his head and looked directly into her eyes. It was the same look from the shelter. A frantic, intelligent plea. A message. "Listen to me, trust me, danger." And in that split second, everything became crystal clear. The warehouse, the shelter. His aggression was never random. It was a language. It was his superpower. He could see something that she couldn't. He could sense the truth behind the smile, the darkness hiding in plain sight. Her heart pounded. She looked from Xander's desperate eyes to the handyman's face. His friendly smile now seemed stretched, artificial. His eyes darted past her, scanning the inside of her home. He wasn't looking at the walls where shelves needed to go. He was looking at the television, the electronics on the console table. Clara trusted the dog. She took a deep breath and placed her hand firmly on Xander's back. "You know what?" she said, her voice amazingly calm. "I'm so sorry, I'm not feeling very well. I think we need to reschedule." The man's smile vanished completely. It was replaced by a flash of annoyance, then anger. "What? You're kidding me. I drove all the way out here." "I'm sorry," Clara repeated, starting to close the door. "I'll call you." Xander still hadn't moved. He was a statue of defiance. "Look, lady," the man snarled, his voice dropping into a menacing register. He put his hand on the door to stop her from closing it. "Just let me in. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard." As his tone changed, Xander erupted. It was a controlled explosion. He didn't lunge to attack, but to command. His bark was a deafening cannon blast, and he pushed forward with his chest, forcing the man back a step. He was an impenetrable barrier, a guardian at the gate. Clara slammed the door shut and locked it, her body trembling. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, her voice a terrified whisper as she explained what was happening. Through the door, she could hear the man cursing, followed by the sound of him running away. The police arrived in minutes. One of the officers was a veteran of the K-9 unit. As Clara, still shaking, recounted the story, he knelt down to look at the magnificent dog standing calmly by her side. "I'll be damned," the officer breathed. "Excalibur, I heard you were gone." He looked at Clara. "Ma'am, this dog is a legend. If he told you that man was bad news, you can take that to the bank." They found Mike 2 blocks away. His real name was Paul Rosser, and he had a long criminal record for home invasion, specifically targeting the homes of pregnant women or new mothers, seeing them as easy targets. His tool belt was mostly for show. His neighbor Sharon was horrified. He had done some yard work for her and seemed so nice. She had no idea of his true nature when she recommended him. Xander hadn't just saved Clara from a robbery. He had saved her and her unborn child from a violent predator. He had done his job. He had spoken his language, and this time, someone had listened. The story became local news, and then national news. The tale of the aggressive police dog who was saved from death row only to save his new pregnant owner was irresistible. Officer Miller, now publicly championing his former partner, helped establish a new foundation for retired K-9s, ensuring they would be properly cared for and never again discarded due to misunderstanding. Xander was no longer a liability. He was a celebrated, twice-over hero. 2 months later, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Leo. From the moment they brought him home, Xander was his devoted guardian. He would lie by Leo's crib for hours, his ears twitching at the slightest sound. When Leo cried, Xander would fetch Clara, nudging her gently with his nose. His fierce protective instincts had found their ultimate focus. He was no longer a K-9 officer. He was a family dog, and it was the most important job he had ever had. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, as Clara would rock her son to sleep, Xander would come and rest his head in her lap. She would stroke his soft ears and look into those wise, amber eyes, and her heart would overflow with a gratitude so immense, it felt like it could power the stars. He hadn't been broken. He had been waiting for someone to see past the noise, to hear the truth in his silence. He was a living, breathing testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we misunderstand, and the most profound connections are the ones that don't require any words at all. They just require a listening heart. They had saved each other. She had saved him from a lonely death, and he, in turn, had saved her in the precious new life she held in her arms, proving that a hero's duty is never truly done. And if you were as touched by Xander's incredible story of loyalty and redemption as we were, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every hero, no matter how furry, deserves to have their story told.